So, in November 2020, Une histoire mondiale des femmes photographes was released in bookstores in France. The book was co-edited with Luce Lebar and published by Textuel, a feminist publishing house dedicated to photography and humanities. Since the invention of photography, on every continent, women have played a major role in its development as photographers, that is, independent creators and original operators. This is this often overlooked reality that this collective work aimed to highlight. 164 women authors, and some of them are here today, so I would like to express my huge gratitude to them for having participated to this book and to having enriched it so much. That is to say, Katarzyna Gebarowska, Maria Kapajeva, Claire Freestone, Charlene Heath, Candice Johnson, Sigrid Lien, Federica Musarelli, and Baiba Tetere. So thank you very much to you. So 164 women authors recounted the careers and the works of 300 women photographers from all over the world, from the birth of photography to the end of the 20th century. But just a few days after the launch of the book, as you know, the COVID epidemic in France and the new lockdown led to the closure of the bookstores. Our publisher was preparing for bankruptcy. However, against all odds, the book has had a huge impact. In just a few months, more than 10,000 copies were sold in France, and it was reprinted twice. And a year later, Thames and Hudson launched the English version of the book. 6,500 copies of this English version has been sold worldwide to date. So this is a record of sales and interest for a 500 book page with with a 500-page book with 400 images. So it is this project, a feminist manifesto, which was from start to finish a female, an international, a collaborative adventure that I would like to discuss with you today. Its origins, its realizations, and its ramifications for future art and scholarship in France. But before that, allow me a few preliminary remarks. First of all, again, I would like to warmly thank the organizers of the conference for the promises of encounters, discussions, discoveries over the next 3 days. Thank you so much, Katarzyna, Maria, and Anna. I would also like to pay a special tribute to Karine Knorr, as she's here and she's supporting the conference. A few important books or moments have determined some of my career choice. I recently, in a conference in Bologna, had the opportunity to mention Federica Musarelli's essay, Women Photographers, Emancipation and Performance, which was published in France in 2009, because 13 years ago, while preparing an exhibition that I will discuss in the first part of my talk, her book, her essay, made me realize that photography was not only an expression of women's emancipation, but also a means of that emancipation. And at the same time, I was studying Oscar Reichländer, works, the first negative, and I discovered Karen Knorr's feminist take on Pliny Smith. In her image, contrary to the tradition, she depicted herself as playing the role of Debutad, this young Corinthian woman who drew the silhouette of her lover's shadow. But with Karine, the lover is a female lover. And with Karine, the upper part of the statue, an icon of the ancient art, is cut off at shoulder height by the frame. With Karen, in fact, the ironic protest targets both academicism and machismo in art. Model and director, she has created a powerful image that puts women at the heart of artistic creation, that undermines the male presence, So from then on, and thank you, Karen, I made this credo my own in my research. So the origins of the book. A world history of women photographers emerged and found success thanks to a groundwork laid by quite a few individual and collective initiatives. That is what I would like to discuss in this first part. In 2014, on behalf of the École du Louvre, a public higher institution that trains future art historians and museum curators, I started a 3-year course entitled Women and Photography, drawing on the tools of social sciences and gender studies. Using the concept of male gaze, I question an unspoken aspect of the history of photography in France, that is to say, the gender, by analyzing the impact of photographers' sexual identity on their practice and on the images they produced. I began by focusing on women in front of the camera, among others, the models and so-called muses. All these women who were largely photographed naked under the pretext of academic studies or creative approaches. All those women who were bodies offered up for voyeuristic delight and fantasy. Bodies also offered up for consumption, serving as commodities promoted by advertising and fashion. I analyzed how women have been and still are the subject of images produced by men and for men. But in parallel, of course, I showed how women from the mid-19th century onwards, including courtesans and actresses, knew how to play on their image, actively participated in their own staging, and worked on their self-promotion. In doing so, they were undermining centuries of stereotypical representations. Third, by placing women behind the lens, behind the camera, I laid the groundwork for a history of photography from the perspective of women photographers, from the 19th century to the present day, by analyzing the subjects, the category genres, and the strategies implemented by women to create, to expand the boundaries imposed by society, and also to gain visibility. In short, yes, history could be written from a female and feminist perspective. Women are not just objects of the gaze, but subjects who gaze. As said by bell hooks, there is power in looking. There is power in looking. At the same time, together with Ulrich Pohlmann, director of the photography collection at the Stadtmuseum in Munich, and Thomas Galifo, curator at the Musée d'Orsay, we conceived an exhibition which we could not have imagined at the time would become a landmark event in France in highlighting the major role of women to the history of photography. At first, I must admit, we were full of prejudices. We had some concerns. Was such a project intellectually relevant? Would we have enough material for a stimulating exhibition that would not be reduced to a succession of maternity scenes, portraits of children, and still lives? And would the public come to see a photography exhibition in a fine arts museum, when photography is often considered as a minor medium? At the end of 2015, Who is Afraid of Women Photographers was presented in both museums, Musée d'Orsay and Musée de l'Orangerie, divided chronologically by the First World War. Thanks to our research in numerous public and private collections in Europe and North America, we discovered not dozens but hundreds of names, thousands of images, and an enormous variety of practices. It should be noted that at the time, out of 50,000 photographs in the Musée d'Orsay collections, fewer than 200 could be clearly attributed to a female photographer. That is to say, 0.4% of the collection was attributed to a female photographer. While we revealed bodies of work by women who were never recognized by their contemporaries, we also rediscovered many women who were famous in their day but have since been forgotten. We were forced to face the facts. Being a female photographer in the 19th and 20th century was neither an exception nor a heresy. Through more than 400 photographs, albums, publications, films produced by 180 women, we showed the gradual expansion of the field of photography for women. We followed a chronological and thematic journey from the first photogenic drawings and photo collage in the tradition of ladies' craft work, from images tied to the domestic sphere, such as tableaux vivants, to the exploration of foreign places, the representation of the sexualized body, reportage, and war. We particularly focused on the collective appropriation of certain photographic genres, such as self-portraiture and self-staging, as well as the critique of gender relations. It is clear that photography is a powerful means of appropriating one's identity, but also a tool for critique and deconstruction, a weapon for women. The challenge was met with 365,000 visitors, 67% of whom were women. The guest book revealed, of course, different reactions from men and from women. Women felt restored by this exhibition, which offered them a genealogy. They were grateful that male domination was being addressed in France. They were full of hope for themselves, of course, and for their daughters. They felt really encouraged and empowered. Conversely, some male visitors were shocked by our strong stance, such as this visitor who regrets the overly feminist slant. Others denounced the principle of grouping artists solely based on gender, which they believe condemns women to be ghettoized, as if women hadn't been ghettoized for centuries. Of course, other museums, art centers, festivals dealing with photography had already addressed this subject. In particular, the Gulbenkian Foundation in Paris in 2009 with a show entitled Au Féminin, an expression that is very difficult to translate, but I suppose you could say it's feminine. 5 years later, les Promenades photographiques de Vendôme, a festival in Central France, presented a thematic show. La femme est une photographe comme un autre. Women are photographers just like anyone else. This title plays on the fact that the word photographer is a word that claims to be universal in France, but is actually a masculine term. On the other hand, of course, since 2006, the Jeu de Paume, an art center, was also presenting a lot of monographic exhibitions about Lee Miller, Cathy Horna, Claude Carin, Diana Arbus, and so on. But the fact that a national fine arts museum located in Paris and with an international reach took up the issue, granted its institutional legitimacy. What became clear in the course of my research is that, with the exception of a few recurring figures, an enormous and formidable body of work by women dating back to the beginnings of photography and spanning the entire Western world, this body of work has completely disappeared from the collective memory. As in all other fields of knowledge and creation, whose history has been written by men, women have long been made invisible, forgotten, pushed to the margins of the medium, even discredited. it's as if women, and particularly strong women, are frightening when they have a machine in the end. In the text that concludes the catalogue of the exhibition, our colleague Ulrich Pollmann analyzes the critical fortune of women photographers in recent French historiography. I think, yes, I will go there. For instance, in the index of Histoire de la photographie in 1986, Pollmann notes 70 female names out of a total of nearly 1,000. In the Nouvelle Histoire de la photographie, the summary gives pride a place to a few important figures in history through 15 focus sections, among others, Nicéphore Niepce, Oscar Reislander, Edward Muybridge, Jean Smith, but no section is dedicated to women photographers. In L'Art de la photographie, Guenther and Poivert revisit really canonical history. However, there are only 46 images produced by women, representing 8% of the 600 illustrations of the book. And let's add that in What is Photography, in 2015, which deals with the nature of photography by drawing on texts written by the photographers themselves, not a single woman is mentioned. So, of course, if women are present in the books, it is mainly as objects of the gaze, as the guerrilla girls prove it. So it becomes clear for me that at that moment, that French-style universalism, which disregards identity categories, such as gender, but also age, social status, geographical origin, this universalism systematically obliterates half of humanity. Apart from a few private publications, such as those by the collector Christian Boucret, in France, all the general histories, anthologies, textbooks overlook an essential part of our collective past. This is a major gap in historical research. All cultural intermediaries, historians, critics, curators, teachers, share these responsibilities for this erasure of women in the history. Meanwhile, we are becoming aware that our Anglo-Saxon and Eastern and Nordic or European counterparts have been doing this reframing work for nearly 40 years. It was really amazing for us. A few years later, in 2019, Luce Lebas, a French historian, published a huge dictionary of photographers with Larousse, the editor. She came to me because she was faced with a dilemma. How could she include female figures in a pantheon of great names that was already overflowing? It was impossible for her to convince the publisher to remove Félix Nadar or Henri Cartier-Bresson from the table of contents and to replace them with Anna Atkins or Sophia Ridet. So we decided to join force. Name it to make it exist. Contrary to a canonical androcentric Western-centric history, our ambition with our book was threefold. First, to offer a global history. Given the weight of studies originating in the West and focusing on the West, we decided to give as much space as possible to photographers from other continents. Second goal, we wanted to conduct a collaborative and decentralized project. We chose to delegate knowledge to others and to go as close as possible to the places where that knowledge was produced. We therefore called on experts and a few male experts, because men are our allies, from Cuba to Greenland, from India to Argentina, to draw up a list of the leading photographers in their countries. At that time, many new names emerged, and the old hierarchies were weakened. Third, we wanted to showcase women's expertise and encourage them. So we only invited women to contribute. They included academics, exhibition curators, writers, critics, journalists, photographers, rights holders, and even photographers themselves. Interesting writing about women to women is a powerful editorial gesture. It counters the erasure of women's voices in history, as well in the media. It recognizes that the first studies on women photographers were mostly conducted by women. And it shifts the focus by allowing new questions to be asked about the history of photography. Because, as philosopher Donna Haraway wrote, all science is situated. So, key facts about from the book. The chronology structure of the book, which was based on the date of birth of each photographer, rather than criteria such as nationality or artistic movement. This structure allowed us to identify cultural, social, political constants that transcend the uniqueness of each individual. In a way, by studying unique itineraries, we could observe universal facts. That is, for 2 centuries, women didn't just contribute to the history of photography, they made it. Once again, we can affirm that they have explored all facets of photographic practice, the fine arts and the many professional and media uses of photography, from portraiture to reportage, advertising, science, fashion, travel, nudes, and even pornography. Whether artists or business leaders, professionals or amateurs, they have been as active in the public sphere as in the private domain, penetrating all the so-called men-only bastions that are sports, entertainment, public space, the political sphere, the theater of war. Of course, the speed of this conquest has varied from country to country, as it is linked to the pace of changes in their social and political status. Access to a darkroom of their own, to paraphrase Virginia Woolf. Economic independence, the possibility of pursuing a professional activity or moving freely in public spaces, the right to vote, the right to study, and of course the secularization of society. So first fact, women have been everywhere and have recorded everything. Braving extreme climates and hostile environments, traveling to the far corners of the planet, women have explored the world, like the Dutch Alexandrine Tin in 1862, who went to South Sudan, like Ellen Messenger Murdoch, who undertook a world tour in 1913. Some were imprisoned. You know that German Krull in Russia was in jail in the early 20s, that Ner Benedicto in Brazil was in jail in 1969. Some died in the field, such as the famous Gerda Taro in Spain in 1937. Some resisted fascist or Nazi oppression at the risk of their lives. You know Julia Perot, a Polish woman who manufactured and transported false documents, false identity documents in France while World War II. Other women were enlisted by totalitarian regimes, such as Beatrix Tudor Hart, a spy for the KGB, or the Chinese Hu Bu, who dedicated her professional life to the dictator Mao. Second fact, we can assert that none of the upheavals of the 20th century escaped them. The two world wars, the discovery of the Nazi camps, the tragedy of Hiroshima, the wars of independence, the social struggles in Europe in the 60s and 70s, the Iranian Revolution of 1979, the Chernobyl disaster in 1986, the collapse of the Soviet bloc, the end of apartheid in South Africa in the early 90s, or the ravages of the Israeli occupation in Palestine. Third fact, systematically dominated and subordinate. Women very often have chosen to focus their lens on the marginalized and oppressed person. Women put their guts into the frame. They look at battered and raped women. They look at exploited children, workers, prisoners, disabled people, indigenous people, all those banished from their lands, homosexuals and transsexuals, invisible people, abused animals, all the obscure members of society, all those persons who struggle and do not set the rules of the game. It is this empathy that makes Anita Conti sensitive to the overexploitation of the oceans in the 60s, that make also Claudia Andujar a champion of the Yanomami cause in Brazil in the 70s, that makes Donna Ferrato a tireless activist in the fight against domestic violence in the USA in the 80s. Fourth, of course, women have invented artistic forms. They have been at the forefront of new movements. They have explored new ways of practicing photography. From the early photograms of the British Constance Talbot, from the early performances of the Countess of Castiglione we have just seen before, to the fictional superhero self-portraits of Jamaican artist Ronnie Cox, and to the colorful self-portraits in the street with a rear view mirror by the Indian Pamela Singh. From the wonderful photographic journals of Veronika Slevite, the pioneer of Lithuanian queer photography in the 30s, to Mariam Sainian portraits of Istanbulites in the 40s, highly evocative of common homosociability in the region. From the light paintings of Barbara Morgan to the artificial negatives of Czech artist Bela Kolarova. Every time, everywhere, each artist offers unique exploration of the aesthetic power of photography. And as you may know, of course, in the 70s and in the 60s and 70s, women gave rise to what would later be called by Gabrielle Shaw and others, the feminist avant-garde. Valley Export, Jo Spence, Anne Nogel, for instance, made their own bodies the main territory of a feminist, of an anti-colonial, of an ecological quest, with photography as their preferred medium among a variety of other media and performative practices. They all showed evidence of male domination, even in the bodies. For instance, Marianne Weeks or the Greenlander photographer Payer Ark. They demanded new representation of the body. They staged erotic fantasies. They made black skin visible. They documented aging bodies, sick bodies, and all bodies mistreated by medicine, such as Abigail Eman facing her own abortion. They also already focused on the fact that we are nature, thanks to Gina Payne and Anne Marchand. Fifth key fact, to gain expertise, autonomy, recognition, women have also supported vocations. They have built networks of sociability and mutual aid among women. They have shared and passed on their experience. Let us recall the first empowerment actions of Frances Benjamin Johnston, who encouraged the photographic careers of her sisters through conferences and articles. Among others, she published in 1997 What a Woman Can Do with a Camera. Like D.K. Chappell a few years later in 1962, who, writing her history as a war photographer, proved that everything could be open to women. A lot of women created also their own clubs when they were denied access to those of their male colleagues. In Spain, for instance, after World War II, Rosa Sux became involved in the self-management of the group Femini, which encouraged the teaching and the practice of artistic photography among women's groups. Many were involved in passing on their skills. Dora Kalmus, Aine-Marie Heinisch, Lisette Model, Jo Spence, they all welcomed apprentices into their studios. Who knows that Helmut Newton, the famous man, trained with Eva in Berlin? Or who knows that Bill Brandt trained with Trude Fleischmann in Vienna? Other women created schools or training institutes. From Javiga Golch, who in 1906 helped found the future Kirchner School in Warsaw, Yves Killer, who launched a conceptual school in Estonia called the Faculty of Taste. Among others, there were Berenice Abbott, as you may know, in New York in the 30s, Lucia Mowley in London, Clara Langer in Budapest, Katy Horna in Mexico, Cristina Garcia Rodero in Madrid, Birgit Jürgensen in Vienna, Tuija Lindström in Göteborg, Nan Goldin at Yale and Harvard, and so on and so on. And last fact, sixth fact, many women published and sometimes interpreted their images, such as Toyoko Tokiwa, who, on the cover of her book, Dangerous Poisonous Flowers, wears a rangefinder camera to her eye. In doing so, she asserts her agency. It's very strong. It's a very strong statement. But what is much less known by the large public is that women photographers have also worked as theorists, historians of photography, through their correspondence and diaries, autobiographies, manuals, manifestos, general histories, university theses, and works on photography applied to science and advertising. The 30s were a rich period of intense ontological reflection of the media, on the medium, and it found a powerful continuation in the theoretical and political ferment of the 70s and 80s. Anna Wilke, Martha Rosler, Val Wilmer, Jo Spence, Jeanne Moustusamy-Ash, Deborah Willis, and more recently Pierre Arc, a Greenlandic artist, they often have questioned photography as a photographer, combining again and again issues of gender, class, race into their reflection. All those publications testify to the fact that women have really occupied the territory of historiography. They have definitively been able to invest the symbolic field by producing thought on the medium. Of course, again, there were a few voices of indignation. This time, not because we were only featuring female photographers in the book, but instead because we had only solicited female authors to write on women photographers, as if that prevented the work of our male peers from being recognized. For instance, a journalist wrote, "In 2020, Une histoire mondiale des femmes photographes was published, with hundreds of entries by name written exclusively by women. Women writing about women. Even though some male historians were undoubtedly more knowledgeable in specific cases. We were also criticized for all the women we were not able to include in the book. There are countless numbers of them, you know that. And we could have produced 10 more books of the same kind without being any more exhaustive. As we wrote, for us, this book was only an introduction to a global history, an invitation to continue expanding research for a richer and more accurate narrative. Let me look at the... Okay, chrono. Having talked about the project and its genesis, I would like now to mention some of the effects of its publication in France and ask the following question: what is this book a symptom of? The book's invitation to take up the baton was quickly taken seriously. Just one example with our publisher, Textuel. They released no fewer than 3 books following ours to complement and to enrich it in relation to the contemporary scene or in relation with certain geographical areas. In 2022, Elle and Paris Photo was an opportunity to honor 130 contemporary female photographers, following the model of our book, which was proactive in empowering female experts. There in the book, 8 female authors were invited. 2 other books were directly inspired by ours. In 2023, Living Space Iranian Women Photographers by Anaïta Gabayan Eteadieh. The book brought together the works of 3 generations of Iranian photographers. And in 2024, Japanese Women Photographers by Leslie Martin, Pauline Vermar, and Mariko Takushi. It was also the following of the book, because after writing the entries on 3 Japanese women in our book, Pauline Vermar contacted our publisher, Textuel, and proposed them that they produce a book focusing on Japanese women photographers since the 50s. Here too, she noted that recognition of the Japanese scene in France had mainly benefited male photographers, even though women had played a key and virtuoso role in the development of photography in Japan. Today in France, not a week goes by without an exhibition, a publication, an academic research, a symposium showcasing women photographers, whether they are grouped together around a historical period or an artistic movement, whether they are celebrated individually. For instance, in 2022, the Rencontre d'Arles finally welcomed the feminist avant-garde, an exhibition by the Austrian curator Gabriele Shaw, a show that has been touring many European cities for a decade without finding a venue in France. In recent years, museums and festivals, art centers in France have also hosted a numerous number of retrospective exhibitions dedicated to Afazali, Julia Margaret Cameron, Arlene Gottlieb, Paz Erazeruiz, Marie-Laure de Decker, Céline Lagarde, Erika Lennart, Claude Andouillard, Tina Modotti, Daniele Moli, and others. Before you could count them, all those events on the fingers of both hands. Today, that's absolutely impossible. So through its form and content, the book, Une histoire mondiale des femmes photographes, has contributed to the normalization of gender as a subject of research. It also came at a time when collective practices were undergoing profound change in France. Let us mention a few of the many initiatives that have contributed to the increased visibility of women photographers, both in history, both in current creation. First of all, I must say that museums and art centers are undergoing a profound transformation. Indeed, the work of female photographers or artists is now a key focus of their acquisition and exhibition policy. For instance, the Musée d'Orsay or the Musée National d'Art Moderne Centre Pompidou, among many others, have set targets for the percentage of women artists to be included in their annual acquisition and exhibitions. The Ministry of Culture has created a ministerial unit, Elles font la culture, they make culture, women make culture, to help develop the careers of female photographers and gender minorities. A lot of associative collectives, widely supported by public authorities, are helping to advance reflection and action and gender diversity in the field of photography. Let's give some example. Archives of Women Artists Research and Exhibition, AWARE, which produces information on 20th century women photographers. La part des femmes, Women's Part, which highlights the underrepresentation of women photographers in collections, festivals, agencies, galleries and exhibitions. Les Filles de la Photo, Girls of Photography, a network of women professional photographers that promotes mutual support, particularly through mentoring. LNCT Residency, with la Cité Internationale des Arts, which offers a research and creation residency program dedicated to mid-career women photographers. And with the Tour L at Paris Photo, every year since 2018, the world's largest private fair, Paris Photo, has renewed its commitment to a program dedicated to women photographers and which is designed by a woman curator. And last but not least, some festivals award a specific prize for women photographers. Les Femmes s'Exposent Festival in Houlgat, which remains unique in France in that it only presents the work of women, awards 2 prizes for women photographers. The Visa pour l'Image Festival in Perpignan, in the south, awards the Françoise Desmulder Prize for women journalists, photojournalists. And the Rencontre de la Photographie in Arles awards the Women in Motion Prize for women photographers, and it is initiated by the luxury group Kering. In 10 years, the landscape of photography in France has undergone a huge transformation. We are all the generation that, challenging male domination in the world of photography, has worked to bring about a cultural revolution. I believe that this book, along with dozens of other projects, has helped bring politics into the practice and study of photography. Numerous exhibitions and events attest to the decisive presence of political concerns in the field of photography and more broadly in the visual arts. All those initiatives constitute a massive effort to write other, richer histories of photography. The quest for gender parity has now become inseparable from the promotion of geographical, social, territorial diversity. In this regard, I would cite as an example the latest issues of the excellent journal Photographica, a review published by the Société Française de la Photographie. The recent themes subjects addressed are very eloquent. First, on the left, it deals with the model and the question of collaboration between the photographer and his/her subjects. The second one deals with the long invisible producers of images, such as retouchers, photo engravers, editors, publishers. The third one deals with photographic expression of domination and emancipation. The fourth one deals with networks for the circulation of photography and what are often referred to other histories of photography, that is to say, histories outside Europe and North America. And the last one, price-cost value, as you can see, deals with an economic reading of the medium. So today, as you can observe, it is not only accepted, but it is really expected to decentralize, to demasculinize, to decolonize representation, and to focus also on all the margins and the peripheries. To conclude, what kind of world do we want to live in? Photography has accompanied the creation of the Great Divide, a fundamental dichotomy theorized by French anthropologist Philippe Descola. This great divide between culture and nature, between women and men, between humans and non-humans, between them and us. Photography, we know that, is linked to the Anthropocene, this new geological era in which humanity has become the main actor in the transformation of the biosphere. Climate change, species extinction, artificialization of our living environments, pollution, and so on and so on. So as witnesses and as actors to the collapse of our capitalist, patriarchal, carbon-based civilization, all of us also have the power, and I believe the duty, to use images to fight all forms of domination and to ensure the habitability of our planet. It is not only a matter of denouncing and deconstructing, but also of taking action by reaching out to as many people as possible. I remember a conversation with the French artist and performer Orlan a few years ago in her studio. Why did you become an artist? Why did you create these images? She was asked. To change the world, she replied simply. As far as I'm concerned, in my daily work as a curator, through acquisitions, exhibitions, publication, I am more committed than ever to highlighting the agency of women in front of the camera and in collaborative projects, as well as to granting visibility to female photographers. But from an eco-feminist perspective, I am more committed than ever to promoting stories and experiences that contribute to changing the collective imaginary, that sketch the contours of a world where we are constantly reminded that friendship connects us all. That's why in my upcoming project, and the next one will be this exhibition about Gabrielle Hébert, a photographer who was totally fond of Italy, of photography, and of her lover. Well, in my upcoming projects, I will again and again talk about women, but also talk about beauty, love, and joy. Thank you so much for your attention.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Marie. I have a couple of questions to start off, and then maybe some other people do. The impact is really interesting. And of course, we're constantly having to measure our impact based on how the universities work in the UK. Have you had any sort of thoughts about impact outside of France for your work?
Not really, because when I was preparing the conference, I was asking again and again my publisher how many copies were sold. And I just learned a few days before that there were 6,000 copies. But before that, we saw that there were no success. So it's a success, but not so huge as in France. But I don't really know what is happening outside of France. And that's the reason why I didn't want to go in that question with my conference, because, in fact, we are too close in our territory. But perhaps you could tell me, do you know? I think a lot of library or university have brought the copy, and I think that the network is working without us in a way.
Yeah.
I think all the women who were involved.
Yeah, I think there's impact. It's just such a difficult thing to measure and to work out. And it's interesting that although all of our countries in Europe, and I know Britain's not quite in Europe anymore, but we're all quite close together. We're all incredibly different, and our personalities as a nation are different. And
but sorry, I think that in fact for us it was a revolution, this book in France. But for you, and in particular in the Anglo-Saxon countries, we were too late. You had already done the job in a way.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly, I mean, Val's book, The Other Observers, was the second book on women in photography in 1986. So we had all this, but it's interesting. I know when we started Fast Forward, for example, we were proposing exhibitions of all women photographers, and it was definitely a no for the museums.
Really?
Definitely.
And why?
Because they thought it perverted the course of history.
Okay.
In the sense... I'm sure Karen or Val might have been in one of those meetings. Perhaps I'm using the word wrongly, but that was the kind of idea. That it was an odd idea to miss people out, if you like, that men would be missed out, despite the fact that women have obviously been missed out for years. So I think it's really interesting what's happened in France. And I know the whole discussion around Arles and... there was a big article, I think, in Libération by, was it Marie Docher?
Yes, Marie
which had a big impact, I think, on the Arles
Festival, yes.
Yeah. And we haven't had quite such a revolution, despite all the research that we've done. But maybe, I don't know, Val and Karen might say something different. But, I was interested also, you talked about acquisition policies.
Yeah.
Do you know the percentages that are being asked for?
Yes, in the Musée d'Orsay, and you are going to love because our aim is to have 10% of the acquisition for women photographers.
Oh, okay.
Women artists.
10.
But it's a huge revolution, but because for some of my colleagues, it's a problem to have a quota and to focus on women photographers.
Interesting.
No women photographers, women artists. For some of them, it's again and again a question.
Yeah, because it's quite a hidden element still. There's an amazing amount of shows on women photographers, and that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But the idea of what's in the collection is quite hidden still.
Yeah. But I must say that I'm speaking of a place which is particular because the Musée d'Orsay is a fine arts museum and is dealing with the 19th century life creation and history. So in a way we are a little bit late in the...
Are other people disclosing their percentages or is it...
Sorry?
Are other museums disclosing their percentages or is it private?
No, I think you can easily find the percentage for the Musée National Centre Pompidou or the... It's quite public information, but I must say that I don't know really.
No. Yeah,
yes.
That's interesting. Are there any questions in the audience?
Hi, everybody. I'm Karen Knorr. Hi, in case I haven't said hi. Hi. I'm just wondering, remember that, Anna, you and I, we went to Tate and we had this discussion. Do we have any figures from Tate ourselves? Have we got any? I know that the Ministry of Culture in France, during Paris Photo, that woman that, sort of said they were aiming for 50%. And then also Arles, I remember in 2014 when all those articles appeared in Libération, that there was discussion of, it was coming up. And in fact, Arles this year was almost, I think, over 50%, which is, bravo, a great, great thing, because Rencontre d'Arles is the mother of all photo festivals, created by two men, basically, but now has evolved to include women, which is great. But the rumor has it, I heard rumors around people saying, oh, there's nobody famous in Arles this year. Nan Golden! The only one to talk about Gaza, publicly, was there. What, she's not famous? The disparagement, despite that achievement, it was extraordinary. And I'm just thinking about the V&A, Parasol, all these acquisition things going on and what the percentages are and how hidden they are. And I'm sort of slightly furious.
I mean, I don't think that the percentages in collections are that visible. I think it's very visible with exhibitions because we can see it and people are talking about it. And I know that the Tate was talking about exhibiting 50% women. I remember that conversation, but I don't know if it's published. But I'm not sure that acquisitions, amounts of women's in national collections are published. And I'm looking at Ali Yao because Ali is a PhD student working with us at UCA and at the National Galleries of Scotland. And it's part of what Ali has been doing is research into the collection because we've talked about the need to have changing policies. And also I know Alex has written a big book about photography museums and collecting photography and creating photography. So I'm sure there are facts and figures, but I'm not sure that I know that they're published, but it's interesting. Okay, any other questions? Okay, we're running out of time. Maria's made a sign. Thank you so much again. That was really fascinating.